Hi, I'm Laura Ferrero, host of Stories in Harmony. I'm also a marketing strategist and writer who helps artists and entrepreneurs share and identify their most powerful stories to attract their ideal audience and grow their business. At Stories in Harmony, we talk to people from all walks of life and hear their stories. We hear about why they do what they do, the obstacles they've encountered and overcome, and lessons they've learned along the way. The hope is that these stories will inspire you in your own life and help you expand your idea of what's possible. Today, we talk to Roger Joseph Manning Jr., an incredible musician who was one of the founding members of the 90s alternative rock band Jellyfish. Since then, he's gone on to be an integral part of Beck's band. He's performed on records for the likes of Morrissey and even has written songs for Ringo Starr. Roger also happens to be the husband of one of my good friends. And while we could talk about music for days, often our conversations delve into different realms where we talk about how we try to approach life, spirituality, health challenges we've encountered and overcome, and the lessons we've learned from them, and a whole lot more. These are the things we go into for today's conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. I am here with Roger Joseph Manning Jr., an amazing artist and an amazing person. So I have to say that we know each other beyond just in the music world. You're the, I guess, would I say husband? Or
yeah, we're married.
Pretty official. You're the husband of a good friend of mine, and Laurel Stearns.
That's how we met.
It's how we met. And so, as much as we could probably talk about music for hours, I thought today, since there are a lot of other places where you talk about your music, we could go in sort of a different direction. And we've talked before a little bit about this, but there have been some challenges we've both faced around health and how it kind of led you to so many personal insights and kind of a spiritual journey. So I'd love to start there with a way to explore. And you told me that when you were in your 20s, when you were in the band Jellyfish, you were kind of living out your musical dreams, but you weren't taking very good care of yourself. And that led to a lot of stress and some health challenges. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yes, you're right. I wasn't taking care of myself because I simply didn't know how. I don't think most, speaking for people raised in this country, most Americans know how. Nor have I necessarily arrived at that place. It's ever evolving. And part of me resents all the time that I've had to spend trying to simply feel my best to be creative, be productive, show up to work on time, and all those things, or go on the road. But in the process, it's been very empowering to not have to rely on, say, the auto mechanic for my car every time it needs something to fix. Right? There are people who fascinated by their car, and they actually can go very deep. And, when they go to the auto mechanic, they're not going to be taken for a ride, so to speak, because they know better, and they've studied their engine. They've studied everything about their car. So a lot of my health challenges, again, as I told you, thankfully, nothing put me at death's door, but it was just making life very, very uncomfortable. I wasn't getting the results I wanted from conventional medicine, AMA, whatever you want to call it. And so, even as early as the 90s, there was no shortage of alternative methodology, philosophies to pursue things. Simultaneously, I was raised traditional Catholic Christian upbringing, and that was not resonating with me as I was leaving the nest and going off on my own in my college years. But like a lot of people who walk away from whatever conventional religion they're raised with, they don't necessarily want to replace it right away with the next organized religion that's coming down the street. So I didn't. and I was having plenty of fulfillment with my artistic pursuits. And the fact of the matter was, though, that as I pursued health, because I was being forced to, and music, which is the art of emotional expression, and actually audio conveyance, as I see it, of the invisible, the spiritual, or whatever word you want to put on it. Those forces started coming together, which is no mystery. I started understanding that, I could try to take these supplements that I was being advised to take, eat differently, exercise more, sleep better, blah, 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 maybe remove these things from the protocol. But there kept being this other component of, well, do I feel spiritually fulfilled? Do I feel a sense of meaning and purpose? All those things, right? Because you can have all the physical completely dialed in, but you're still going to feel out of balance if you're not in balance. We are spiritual creatures having a physical experience in the simplest terms, in my opinion. That's certainly how it works out for me. And if I don't nourish that side of me, I am in deficit. I'm out of balance. Now, music certainly does that. That's why I'm so drawn to it. And it can't be the beginning and end. It can't be my total diet of spiritual sustenance. So, all this is to say, it's been a good 30-year journey of creating more and more balance in my life, because the whole reason I was getting sick repeatedly and chronically suffered from this, that, and the other, besides the built-in genetic factor, besides the built-in environmental factor, was I was out of balance. And I had to learn what that meant for me and what that was going to look like in healing that.
Yeah, and I know that there were a few things that you tried and experimented with that yielded some of the results that you were looking for, but then ultimately it went, I guess it became a little bit too extreme. Like, for example, eating a completely raw diet for a while, that yielded some good results to begin with, but then, you had other health problems as a result of that. And I remember what you said the last time we spoke, that it actually became an invitation to kind of explore some deeper things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, one of the sides of my personality that I've learned about, because part of this journey is self-awareness and your relationship with yourself, and really learning what choices you make serve you over time and which don't. So maybe I want to let those go. And often you can't see the forest for the trees kind of thing. A well-meaning family member or a counselor, therapist, or a good friend or your spouse might point something out to you that you've never seen. And you're like, maybe after the 10th person has pointed this out to me, I might want to take a look at it. And you don't have to, but it is a bit of a clue. And I have a tendency to not want to waste my time with any kind of... I go all the way. In other words, if I'm going to conduct an experiment, I want to literally give it the old college try. There's no pussyfooting. There's no... and this has served me musically. I'm very passionate about musical endeavors I put my mind to, right? And that's been a huge asset. It's allowed for a work ethic to come in to play, and me going, oh, I have this fantasy that you visualize something like any artist. Well, I don't know what the journey looks like to arrive there and realize that piece of art, but I'm determined, because I believe in what I see as the end result, to get there. So my health journey's been that way a lot as well. Particularly if I was not feeling well or was very self-conscious about my appearance because of a way a symptom was manifesting on my outward appearance. There were these friendly nudges from the universe, Mother Nature, whatever you want to call it, my spiritual self, to you'd better take a look at these things. It would behoove you to give this more time. It would behoove you to pay attention. And that's all this was. It was invitations to pay attention. So once I got the alert, I was like, all right, let's do it. I'm going to pay attention, and I'm going to see what this is all about. And one of my explorations was a raw vegan diet, which was very fashionable in the late 90s, early 2000s, particularly in Southern California. There was no shortage of health guru rock stars, as me and my friends dubbed them, because they were very engaging, enigmatic people who looked the picture of health. The opposite sex were flocking around them, whether they were a male or female practitioner. And just like anybody who is eager for new information and finding a so-called panacea, cure, antidote, whatever, I was all ears. And I'm not just with the raw food community. I have and continue to explore all kinds of. I am fascinated, and I am looking for the simplest way from point A to point B. The raw vegan journey, which was 8 years, was one of those explorations, one of those experiments. And you're conducting an experiment on yourself.
Right.
I call it guinea pigging myself. And just like you said, for the first 4 years or so, it served me wonderfully. And then literally over time, I became malnourished. Now, I can only speak from my vantage point and the needs of my body and my metabolism. I know people to this day that are thriving on that diet, and they've been on it for 20 years.
Yeah.
Or other variations, non-raw vegan, vegetarian, or they only eat a little fish, right? Some guys are eating meat dominates the meal. Other guys are all the way over here, and they're just eating like uncooked, caveman raw and dairy and some nuts. And anyway, my point is I don't claim to be here talking to you today knowing anything. I'm not proclaiming that any diet is the one diet. All I know is from 30 years of trial and error, what now seems to serve me best. And taking a lot of detours that had to be taken because I didn't have any other role models. When I went vegan in the early 90s, it was still like, all right, well, good luck when you're traveling through the United States. You might have a little better luck in Europe, but, and you would just accept these things and navigate it however you were able. And, but yeah, to get back to your final answer, so the lots of aspects of my health journey have been challenging, just being in this body, if you will. And right, everybody has some challenge. These challenges, particularly when they were very consuming. So in becoming malnourished at the back end of the raw food experiment, I was exhibiting symptoms that were very concerning and invited me to kind of check out of my life for about 1.5 years while I sought professional help to rehabilitate.
Yeah.
Now, during that time, which needless to say was very scary for me, because I literally went to 8 different doctors of all walks of life, from the most staunch MD all the way to the most holistic, hippy-dippy practitioner, and everybody in between. Nobody could figure out what the hell was going on with me. At the end of the day, it was quite simple. I was in the throes of malnutrition, not unlike an anorexic person who has unintentionally, because the anorexics are intentionally starving themselves. I was unintentionally starving myself and was very out of balance as far as my vitamin mineral content, essential fatty acids, protein, sugars, everything that your body needs to be balanced. It was all out of whack. I had too much of this and not enough of this and blah, blah, blah. So that started sending up a bunch of warning signs in the form of a variety of symptoms, which were very scary because I didn't know what they were. None of my family or friends knew what they were. I knew I didn't feel like I was dying, but stuff was messed up. And thankfully, I finally arrived at a chiropractor of all, who practiced a wide variety of things, as a lot of chiropractors do, who was able to run a series of tests and say, I know what's going on, and I believe I can assist you. Are you ready to begin? And it's been 10 years of one step at a time. And so I won't bore you with all the details of that. Suffice to say, I'm way better off than I was when I was having my adrenal crashes and all the other symptoms. And in the process, had sunk to such a low as far as how I was physically feeling in this body and my outlook and optimism for just wanting to seize the day, embrace the world, celebrate life, because that's not how I felt. I felt very down in the dumps, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, it can really take a toll emotionally when you're not feeling well physically for an extended period of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that naturally, I was already headed on this somewhere around 2000, early 2000s. I had this yearning finally, after not engaged in any kind of religious or spiritual practice, to start looking under some rocks. The curiosity was too loud. Something inside me was saying, you don't have the answers you want yet, and you're not going to be able to be at peace until you get them. Right? I mean, it was that vague. And I just began asking questions and talking to people, and the internet was starting to be more of a source for just information searching. I didn't know what I was looking for. And it was actually a very freeing, incredible journey. I mean, it still is. I don't want to say I've arrived. But it was really like, I felt like a child again, going to Disneyland for the first time, only it was, spiritual, metaphysical, what does it all mean, Disneyland.
What I know, we've talked a bit about like A Course in Miracles and some of the teachings from that book, but are there sources that, or teachers, specific teachers or lessons that really resonated with you or are resonating with you?
Well, just like the health journey, the spiritual soup it's endless. And I can honestly say that just like the health journey, I learned something and benefited from everything I've explored. Now, some of it has made a greater impression and served me longer and served me better. And right, I've accumulated, right, I've got my tool belt, and it's all my handy dandy notes for how to take better care of myself and show up as the optimal version of myself in this world. And there's the spiritual components to that as well. And so, I mean, there have been so many. Half the names I don't even remember because it might have been a book I read in 1997 or something. Some video lecture I watched in 2005. But it's all valuable. I mean, I guess my kind of point is exploring is the point, because you're going to I may turn you on to somebody. You may go give them the time of day and expose yourself to them. It may not resonate with you as deeply as it did me. Why? Well, we've had different life circumstances that have shaped us. And even though I believe we all thrive off the same basic truths and ingredients, often the messenger, of which there's such a wide variety, the messenger can influence us and determine whether or not we're going to be inspired to pursue it more.
For better or for worse.
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So, but somebody very obvious that I want to bring up, though, is Eckhart Tolle, or however you pronounce his name. And it wasn't even so much his book, Power of Now, which I've certainly listened to ad infinitum. We were talking about reading earlier. I've never read any of these. I've listened to them. They're all on audio.
Oh, yeah.
And the joy of that for me has been, remember I told you I can get kind of obsessive, which that can be an asset. So as long as I know I'm obsessive, I can make sure that I don't hurt myself by only being obsessive. I can put the brakes on stuff. But what that translated into for me in self-help world or audiobook world was something that looked like, okay, here's a 6-hour audiobook, and I'm stuck in LA traffic how many times during the month? or I can't sleep at 3 a.m, or I've got all these crappy chores to do around the house like anybody. I got to do the dishes, take out the trash, whatever it is, I've got the headphones in. I've got the headphones in all the time. And even if I'm listening to 10 minutes of it, what happens is repetition starts driving the point home. Or, and this happened with Eckhart Tolle all the time, he would have said, I would have heard him say something 15 different times. And then on the 16th time, I was like, oh, that's what he means.
Now you get it.
That happened to me when I was talking to a friend last week. That's what he's talking about. And so now, in that moment, I have experiential knowledge. And that's the only kind of wisdom that we then take away, is when we experience it. Because we can intellectualize stuff till the cows come home. We can talk to people at a party about this, that, and the other. And there is a student-teacher element that helps reinforce things. But when you have a lived experience, that's when you're like, now it's solidified. And that's when it becomes like, I can pull this out anytime I need it. And it's going to assist me.
Yeah, it's so true.
Because you've proven it to yourself, is my point.
Right. You can hear something many times and it just won't resonate the way it will at a certain point in your life, because perhaps something has happened that taught you that lesson, and then you can see it differently.
Yeah.
Or I don't know, sometimes I do actually do a lot of reading, and I have some books that are sort of inspirational to me. And if I'm having a morning where I'm having trouble getting motivated or feeling inspired, I'll just spend 20 minutes reading it, and I'll just let it fall to a page and see what lessons reveal themselves to me that day. And almost always I get something different out of it than I did the first time I read it. It's so interesting.
Yeah. And this has all been a very, very natural process. But I will say this, even as a child or young adult, I was constantly running around going, well, why are the well-meaning adults in my world doing things this way? Who said? Is it just tradition that I'm witnessing here? Or are these proven practices? And often you defer to the adults. Why? Well, for no other reason than they've been on the planet longer than you. I mean, hopefully they've already fallen down and picked themselves up enough. And often that is the case. And you can learn from your elders, especially your grandparents and so forth, as a young person. And as I left the nest and was like, okay, can't rely on mom and dad forever kind of thing. And very lucky I had the parents I did, and very fortunate that they provided such a foundation. But I got to figure this stuff out. And whether we're talking about relationships or taking care of my body and health properly, or managing finances, or like I said, quenching that spiritual thirst. Personal responsibility is everything. You can ask people as many questions as you want. You can read as many books as you want. Nobody can do it for you, right? It's the tried and true old statement of personal responsibility is everything. And if you are not happy with what your life looks like today, I'm sorry, there's nobody to blame but yourself, right? And we can argue for days about whose head start looked like somebody's different head start, what level of affluence you were born into. Oh yeah, but you had loving parents, and my dad split. Okay, there are as many different stories as there are people on the planet. Now you're at a choice point. What am I going to do with that? And I watch this every day with musicians. Got news for you. Everybody's talented. It's what are you going to do with that? To what degree do you have the perseverance, determination, vision to develop that talent, hustle? Do you have a business sense for marketing your talents? Some people, right? Some people we're never going to hear from, even though they are as talented as anybody we know, because they never could get that kind of business, finance, like self-promotion kind of side to it down. And that's not bad. It's just they're not going to do well in terms of commerce.
It's true. Part of what I do is help musicians and artists share their brand story, and that might turn some people off, but the truth of the matter is, if you are a musician, you're running a small business to some extent, if you want to make money from it, of course. And I've said this before, it'd probably be wonderful to live in a world where the music just spoke for itself, and in many ways it does, but you need to...
That's the exception.
Yeah.
Where it's just the music. Oh, they're so damn talented that they just dwarf everybody else, and they've risen to the cream of the crop. And by that point, they got all these other people managing their affairs and taking care, and they just need to get up in the morning and show up and do what they do. That's the exception. Yeah, certainly there's those kind of beautiful freaks running around the planet that make the rest of us look like that we've never practiced or have any talent. But
yeah, and I've found too, I'm paying attention to. I have pretty much my whole career because I help people share their stories, and I am just so naturally curious and find it really fascinating, and I love hearing people's stories. But I've also kind of been more analytical about it in recent years, and I think some of the artists or even entrepreneurs or businesses that you care most about, their backstory. You can connect with them on an emotional level and relate to them. And that really, you don't just want to turn on a song and just hear the song and then not know anything about the person behind it. If you really love the song, most times you want to know more about the person or the band or whatever the case may be, or the business that you're buying from. Things have changed since the days of just buying, your Johnson & Johnson baby powder or something, and not really knowing anything about the huge corporation behind it. People are very curious to know more about people's stories, and also, as you were saying, we all have different and unique backstories, and then what is the story we're going to tell about our lives now? What is the narrative, in a way, if we use that analogy, that we're creating for ourselves? And I think that you're to be commended, because some people who have a lot of stress and a lot of health challenges might try to cover it up. Unfortunately, it's very common, especially in music, with alcohol or drugs or other things that are not about becoming more healthy and more whole.
Yeah, and I tried those Band-Aids like everybody else. Why? Because I didn't know any better. That's what I saw the well-meaning adults doing in my environment.
Yeah.
Whether it was fellow musicians or people from other walks of life. I'm not discounting the immense joy and fun that can be had with substances or alcohol. The issue for me became, ultimately, I wasn't getting what I wanted. Kept trying to take the high to a greater place for some kind of pseudo-spiritual experience that I didn't even know I was looking for. Well, why didn't I was looking for that? Because I wasn't self-aware enough to know that I had a hunger for that. Or the other things that the substances do is just your soul, spirit, whatever label we want to put on it, is always calling out for what it's craving. And when you feel joyful, that means you've celebrated an arrival. You have some newfound peace in your life. That's joyful, and you can have grace. But if that's not going on, if you're in a state of chaos or just low-grade chaos, low-grade stress, your inner voice is always going to be calling out for healing. I need resolution here. And unfortunately, that can be something that goes back as far as when you were 7 years old in your relationship with your mom or whatever. Or it can be as recently as 2 years ago with your previous breakup with your mate. The point is that if something is unloving, primarily to yourself, but also, of course, then that exhibits outward, unloving towards others, but it's primarily about yourself. It's relationship with self. So if you're constantly making choices that aren't serving you and are demonstrating that you don't think very highly of yourself, and how can that be, and why is that? Then you're going to hear about it unless you subdue and suffocate those voices. Well, that's what substances and alcohol do better than anything. It's a distraction. I'm not demonizing them. They also can complement periods of celebration in our lives. But there's a reason they're called spirits, and it became really clear to me that not only was I not reaching the transcendence and transcendental experiences from substances that I didn't even know I was seeking, but they weren't shutting up the screaming voices inside my essence, my disturbed psyche. And the fact of the matter, this is every human walking the planet in some degree or another. And somebody may be listening going, oh, that's not me. Wow, you really were on the edge. Like, if you listen to your inner voice for 2 seconds, it's going to tell you what it's inviting you to pursue. And I believe that's part of the, I don't want to say it's point or purpose of this limited time in the body and on this planet, but I was just getting, look, there were more invitations to do something about this than not. So I kept going, life's too short. I got to try to get some resolution here because I don't even feel good enough to enjoy this short life that I'm going to have. So that's why, and to this day, it's a constant challenge time-wise to make uninterrupted focus time for my art, to make uninterrupted focus time for my relationship with Laurel, to make uninterrupted focus time for taking care of this body, particularly as I age, and taking care of my spiritual soul essence, because that's one of the pillars that if that gets kicked out of the way, everything else goes to shit. Particularly the music. And in fact, the music it's dual. So I've been very blessed as all of us have some affinity for something, right? I know that your writing and your expression through that is very arduous, long hours, focus, right? Like any good piece of writing has to be. And I bet you find a certain amount of great fulfillment in doing that, in expressing your heart and your intellect through that and your essence. Yeah. So that's how music has always been for me. Music has been the escape hatch. So no matter how grotesque and overwhelming my life got, I had the outlet of music to literally cry in a productive way. As I was able to turn self-pity into something constructive. And that also included times that I was feeling joyful. Some of my favorite songs I've written were a direct result of when I was in a really good place. Not just, oh, she broke up with me, bitch, blah, 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 go pick up guitar, blah, blah, blah. That rarely has been the case for me, although frustration, depression, those things, it's been a very healthy channel as opposed to whatever the quickest fix is. And that can be overeating. Any kind of physical indulgence can quiet that voice temporarily. But you learn what that is for you. Like somebody can say, well, I gave up coffee, and they can stand on their little pedestal, and I've cleaned all that crap out of my diet and blah, 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 blah. And I'm going to meditation 3 times a week. And okay, but if you don't feel like you're a fully expressed person and you're living in inauthenticity, and the world doesn't really get to hear about who you are and what you have to say, and you feel kind of suffocated, then you're out of balance. And that's just one little example, but everybody has to figure out what that means for themselves. Again, no organized religion's going to do it. No well-meaning medical practitioner or guru is going to do it, and no self-help book's going to do it. They can all invite you to explore, but the person's personal job in healing, it's a game of solitaire for the most part. Even though people can come together and hold each other and say, I understand, even though I didn't walk through cancer the way you just did, I can hold this space for you, and you can be open and 100% honest with me, and we can be vulnerable together, even though we're not in a, say, romantic relationship. And that's what love and compassion looks like to me. Yeah. It's like it's a lot of one or groups coming together and going, I get you, and you're not alone. And that's really all that needs to be said, because we can't walk in each other's shoes. We can only share our personal experiences, which is what your podcast is all about.
Yeah, no, it's so true, Raj. And I guess to be, to share a little bit about my journey, like, because I've done a lot of the things, I eat mostly a vegan diet, and I meditate and I do yoga. Yet there's still, for me, I tend to worry a lot. So worry is fear-based, right? And I can, one of my goals is to be able to feel inner peace regardless of what is happening externally around me, which is, I think, probably one of the textbook primary spiritual goals per se. But it's so not an easy thing to do. And so for me, just trying to cultivate that inner peace and also to let go of my worry and self-criticism. I can be very critical of myself, not so much of other people. It's funny because you think, oh, if you're criticizing yourself, you're going to be cruel to other people. That is not at all how it manifests.
No, that's not necessarily the case
for me, but it's more, being very hard on myself. And those, as I get older, it's still like I'm definitely more aware of it than I used to be. And I think that is certainly a good step in helping to maybe dissolve that or resolve it a bit. But it certainly is like there are days when the journey gets so hard and it feels so solitary, even though I have wonderful friends and a wonderful husband. There are just days when I'm like, so I get down on myself for not being further along on this journey, but then there are days when it's very different. And I feel it's certainly not a straight line. Like I'm making progress, but it'll be a step, step forward, a step back, 2 steps forward, a step back, it's never linear. And boy, is that, I don't know. I feel like right now where I am in my life, I'm in it, really, really aware of that. And it's not a walk in the park, is it?
Well, if there's anything the last 30 years have taught me is that you never arrive, because there's always something to learn. There's always greater awareness and consciousness to gain, or the word enlightenment, because I believe that's all enlightenment is. It's not some giant mystical quest. It's a remembering of the truth of who and what we really are, and the simplicity of truth. And I'm not talking about the subjective my truth. I'm talking about natural law, cause and effect, just basic truths in this physical realm that we find ourselves. And you're always learning and growing if you want. That's why I never claim to like, hey, as of this date in 2022, this is what's working for me. And I can safely say I'm better off than I was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And what's working for me, I'm not advocating for anybody else. Someone wants to interview me, see what's worked, and they want to try it, more power to you. And I'm going to always get on the phone and answer a call or something, answer a question. But it's always just about sharing personal experience, because I know people who are they seem to be very much at peace, and they're doing a lot of different things than I do. And you said a second ago it can be challenging, without a doubt, because what's going on is, with no blame, we show up, and as little ones, we get programmed by our well-meaning parents and our well-meaning environment, and ultimately the world at large. We get programmed. We're sponges waiting to absorb the next thing. Well, that's going to add up to something when you're 15, 20, 25, 30, right? You're now the product of everything that you've absorbed. And most of us didn't have a choice in absorbing it. It was what was right in front of us. So they put us down in front of this TV show. They put us in this church and listening to this guy. Mom and dad did this. Uncle and aunts did this. And on and on and on. And that's why there's no blame. But at some point, again, you take inventory, you lovingly check in. It's compassionate inquiry is what many people have called it. And you say, am I happy with what's going on for myself? And if you're not, you are at choice. If you can muster the action, determination, courage, will to explore, well, why not? Let's figure this out. And it's all achievable. I've healed amazing hurdles in my life, and I'm in the process of healing other ones. Yeah. And who knows how long they're going to take. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I learned very much and came face to face with on my path is, but I'm worth it, right? Because that's the only thing that's going to get you up out of bed in the morning and tackle any of this face on. Well, hell yes, I'm worth it, aren't I? Well, only you can answer that question. Ultimately, hopefully the person arrives at, yes, I am deserved of giving and receiving love because I am love. Ultimately, you keep distilling every challenge, everything that feels good, everything that doesn't feel good. It all is going to come down to love or fear. And every minute, if we're paying attention or are conscious, where our level, whatever our level of awareness is, we're making choices for ourselves and our community from a place of love or fear. That's driving the whole thing. This is what I'm talking about, simple truths. That's not up for debate, right? Anger, jealousy, worry. I mean, you can go down the 7 deadly sins or whatever. They're all offgrowths of a root cause of fear. And then all the stuff that feels good, compassion, sharing, selflessness, giving and receiving physical pleasure, brightening somebody's day by an unrequested gesture or whatever. Those are all extensions of love because that's who we are at our essence. Fear is actually an illusion. I won't go. There's all kinds of directions we could take this conversation. The point is that, oh yeah, we're worth it. But nobody can tell you that but you. You have to understand that at the deepest level. And you may have days where you're like, hell yes, let's do this. Of course I'm going to get up and jog before it's light out because I know that's going to serve me. And other days you have to talk yourself out of bed. Like, yeah, but don't I deserve a break? Wait, don't I deserve? And that's for every person to kind of just figure out for themselves. What does this look like for me? This celebrity can tell you they did it this way, and this well-meaning person can tell you they did it, and this life coach can tell you this, and your therapist can tell you this, and blah, blah, blah. That's all great. At the end of the day, you got to make the call. You got to find the will. And ultimately, in my personal experience, it's been, at its root, it's all an act of self-love.
Yeah, and Roger, I'm curious now, you said fear is an illusion. Could you take the conversation in that direction? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, my teachings and what keeps coming up over and over again is that love is all there is. Love is what our essence is. And fear, as real as it can seem, is the exact antithesis. So we can convince ourselves of anything. And again, I know how deeply intense fear can feel. And I continue to explore what my relationship is with fear because not a day goes by where I don't experience it to some degree. But all I meant really was that when you devote yourself and devote your practice to only choosing out of love and reconnecting with your core, which is that, by birth. And again, if you want to connect that to the divine, invisible, you can put whatever face on it that you want. I no longer need any proof that that is what's fueling me and everybody else, whether or not they know that. Fear is a rabbit hole we can go down and we can explore. But then when we start getting into layers, that's why this is like a multi-podcast, event, right? I mean, you start getting into layers of, well, then are we our bodies? Are we the physical experience that we're having? I firmly believe we're not. But I firmly believe that after me playing with that concept for decades. What does that really mean for me to be experiencing this three-dimensional plane in this body that I inherited? Did I actually choose it? Right? You can get into all this stuff, and most people, of course, are just like, look, I just want to wake up, get through the day, pay my bills, hopefully had a couple laughs along the way, and maybe treated myself to a nice dinner. I get it. Yeah, that's kind of what my day looks like too. And none of that is actually who and what we are. That's why those meaningful moments that we have when we deeply connect with a person, or when we're meditating, or when we're in artistic expression, or when we're on a walk in nature, or we see some people sharing an act of love between the two of them, maybe a mother and child, whatever it is. That's why those moments are so powerful for us, because they resonate, right? And they're not even any words attached to them. They're just like emotionally so hypercharged. They're just like, that's so powerful, right? Because all the other stuff that we're engaged in all day long is all fodder.
Yeah, and I have to say, I had a moment, or I guess a few hours like that with you just a few months ago, shortly after the it was safe to see each other again. We were kind of coming out of our holes, and I was, I had gone hiking with Laurel, and you came out to say hello, and just the two of us, we ended up chatting for about 3 hours, standing in front of my car
in the middle of the night. Yeah.
In the middle of the night, and I felt so energized after that conversation, so grateful that just spontaneously happened. And you're right, there was like a power to it that, just like grabbing dinner the day before didn't have. And so, yeah, it is true. And I guess I hadn't made that correlation that like those kind of are the more magical, mystical moments.
Absolutely. And the saving grace for me, like I said, when I stopped devoting any time to any kind of religious practice, being raised Catholic, not that I was a good little choir boy or anything, I stopped going to church as soon as I could, because it was not serving me. That was very clear. And it's not like I read the Bible every night before bed or anything like that. But music, the more and more it became my livelihood. So I was doing music a lot, more than I ever had, and devoting myself to it and wanting to continue to develop my craft as much as possible. When I had a good songwriting day, or when something artistically came together, often very quickly, it was the closest thing that I could articulate to a transcendental experience. Mm. It was highly spiritually charged. I didn't have words for it. I felt that there was a force welling up inside of me that was asking for release, and it was being released through a performance, or sitting down and figuring out a songwriting jigsaw puzzle, or recording with my bandmates. And singing can be a very cathartic, emotional release, right? And the key of singing, of course, is, you got to get everything in pitch and in time, but you have to have emotional conveyance. If you're not conveying the intent of the lyric, then you're not a very good singer, frankly. So I always had this spiritually charged experiences with music. That's why I never became full atheist realm, for lack of a better word. I guess you could call it agnostics. Like, there's something there, I just can't tell you what it is. That's how I always felt. And most of the time, I didn't have to bother to figure that out. Life was going in 5,000 billion different directions. Why would I spend any time on it? But that kind of calling, yearning for that relationship with that invisible part, it was clearly a part of my human experience, and clearly part of my musicality, but it was totally invisible. I mean, music's invisible. Other than seeing the speaker diaphragm vibrate, or if we could see our eardrums moving, it's invisible, but it's very real. And right, music can be some of the most transcendental, inspirational experiences the most atheistic person, non-believer person in the world wants to have, can be through music. And it was very easy for me to go, That's real, but I don't need to put a face on it. This doesn't have to. I can call it God if I want, or I can call it the universe if I want. I can call it Gaia if I want. It doesn't matter. That's irrelevant. It can be male gendered, female. It's all irrelevant. What's important is that it's tangible. To me, it's real. It's completely visceral. And that's why if the word God comes out of my mouth, it has nothing to do with the Christian caricature that I was raised with. That may serve some people, and so be it. But a close friend asked me after not talking to me before, I was like, "Oh, so are you born again?" And I was like, "Well, thank you for noticing, but nothing could be further from the truth. What's going on for me is just personal, and there's a resonance, and I know that the best part about this has been it was very real for me in music, and I'm like, well, what would it look like if the rest of my life always was working with this force, was in tandem with it? Oh, lo and behold, I am that force. We all are. That's why this is now becoming easier and easier, because you start, you've heard this a million times through millennia, you start letting go of your illusion of self, which is ego, and you start surrendering to the love, essence, spiritual whole, the oneness of who and what we really are, right? So this is where we get into the illusion of bodies. The ego loves the fact that when I look at your physicality, how could we possibly be in union? Well, if I take my teaching seriously and enjoy them and apply them, our minds are always connected. Our emotional bodies and that which drives us and inspires us and makes us feel good and makes us feel, it's all universal. The invitation is to let go of, you look past appearances. And the really, really interesting thing is, the deeper I've gone over the years into some of these invitations to let go of what I think the body's eyes see, what I think the body's ears hear, the limited five senses that we have, right? That's the joy of hallucinogens. Hallucinogens take all the filters away from the five senses, and suddenly we're perceiving all kinds of stuff, sometimes to the point of it's too overwhelming for some people, or the ayahuasca journeys that are so fashionable and what have you for people. The filters come down, and now we're communicating with more of our whole essence, the magnitude of who and what we really are, because we're not these limited bodies that show up here and have this finite existence. So we can start getting into all kinds of layers of metaphysics. Time is an illusion, all this stuff. But at the end of the day, peace has been cultivated in my life from basically remembering the following: being willing to allow myself to surrender to this. And I don't have to say, this is it. I'm being invited to just try it out. Surrender to it for a while, see how it feels. See what my experience is with going, I'm not who I think I am. I'm not the name I was given. I'm not the flesh that I see in the mirror. What I really am is love showing up in this version. My personality, my essence, the way music expresses through me versus the way it expresses through my neighbor. And that we are all, and this is very key, infinite. So death is an illusion. I'm not saying the body doesn't go away. I'm saying death is an illusion. Our essence, we're energy, we're love energy, is perpetual. We are unconditionally loved. We exist because we emanate from love. Ideally our parents had us because they loved each other. So that's step one. But on a more macro level, children of God essence, again, whatever face you want to put on that. This is a big one. We are innocent. Now you can play with that for a very, very long time, because there's all kinds of ways that we can convince ourselves, and controlling mechanisms want to convince us that we are guilty, and that you can spend your whole life existing for some kind of penance around atonement, around the supposed guilt.
Catholic Church is
almost
notorious
all
for
of them.
that. Yeah.
And it doesn't even have to be. There's guilt manipulation in the secular community as well.
Sure.
Okay, so
or even the way products are sold to us.
Correct.
You know, yeah.
You are less than unless you buy this. Yeah. Unless you subscribe to X, Y, and Z, you are in deficit. And if that's been our programming since day one, well, who wouldn't? Of course you're going to buy into it. So the invitation then becomes, stop beating up yourself for buying into their schemes and scams. And how did I fall for that so easily? We didn't know any better. We're innocent children. It's very, very helpful to always go. You hear a lot of the self-help community talk about the inner child. Well, that serves a great purpose in that you can be compassionate with yourself and go, I was always doing my best given the information I had. There's no time machine. If I could go back with the wisdom I have now, I would have chosen very differently. I would have made a decision that served me much better. So you have to forgive, and that was the fourth thing I was going to say, forgiveness. So eternal, innocent, unconditionally loved, and forgiveness.
Yeah, Raj, I remember you said meditation for you is trying to stay as present as possible and to forgive ad infinitum, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the funniest, most fascinating part about all this is that I've been learning that what temptation means for me is to be tempted in any given moment because of any set of circumstances to forget the truth and the truth of who and what we really are. Because when I am tempted to think otherwise and to believe a fallacy, then I'm going to make choices that are mostly fear-based, and they're not going to serve me. And I'm like, temptation, where have I heard that word before? Oh, it's riddled throughout Christianity.
Yeah, the Bible.
So I can't tell you how many times I've learned something and go, wait a minute, that's what that nutty parable that's got Jesus doing this, that, and the other with all the magic tricks and everything going. No, it's a parable. It's not literal. He's basically saying, there is no difference between you and your brother and sister. You're one. So logic would dictate in hurting them, you're hurting yourself. So if you're trying to get ahead, ultimately you're shooting yourself in the foot. And there was some literary, wonderful Shakespearean way of putting this parable together, whether those were the exact words uttered out of Jesus' mouth, right? And this is what I always go, I joke with my therapist and other well-meaning people about, it's like, I really don't care who said it, how it got to me, what form it came in, parable, whether is it resonating with me or not? And when I try it in the real world, does it work? And then I go, wow, that was awesome. In my previous relationships with women, we always got in this argument, and this argument, and this argument. Maybe the commonality there was me, not them, and they're different, because they were coming in with their own experiences, obviously. Can't change that. Only they can change that if they want to, but I can change how I was showing up. And then I go, I'll try it different based on some teaching in Eckhart Tolle's book or my therapist or whatever it is, or 5 teachings I've put together into one. Let me try it that way. Oh, damn, I got a wonderfully different result. How cool is that? Well, then you go, well, I can't wait to try it out next time. Now, that's persistence, commitment, a willingness, and effort. And that can be hard work also. And somebody listening to us may go, well, why would I want to do that? My Netflix series is on, and I'm going to miss it if I don't get in there at 9 o'clock when it's on. I got to see what happens in the next episode. Totally. I get that. And we only have 24 hours in the day. So figuring out what's leisure for me is a whole different ballgame than it was, even 10 years ago. No judgment. Everybody's got to figure out what works for them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I struggle with that too, just because sometimes at the end of the day, I'm just kind of mentally and physically exhausted, and
Sure.
it is so easy to just turn on the Netflix. And I do it sometimes, but I'm trying to be a little more mindful about that. And I'll spend time reading these books that I find really edifying, or journaling, or doing things like that, doing my pottery, which I find very meditative, but it's the challenges of this world are many, and it's sometimes it does feel good to just kind of switch it off and inhabit a fictional world for a while. And that's not to say, like, I've seen some wonderful films and shows that have life lessons that I've taken
Sure.
from those stories many times, but yeah, it is hard kind of beating that moral compass all the time, isn't it?
But it's your own moral compass.
Right, it's our own,
So nobody's
yeah.
got a gun to your head.
That's true.
And so you get to be in charge of what that means for you. And when you've given yourself the gift and when you have withheld a potential gift from yourself.
Yeah, it's true. And, it's interesting just about the spiritual principle that we are all one and that we're all connected. And, it's something that as a kid, I didn't know, I couldn't have articulated, but something in just the way I came into the world, I suppose, was, just kind of inherently knowing that. And I've never been able to understand, this probably sounds so like Pollyanna-ish, but I've never been able to understand war, or how people can be unkind to one another based on what they look like or where they come from, or certain arbitrary borders that men created to cross countries, to divide the countries. In many ways, I was very fortunate that I was born in the United States, as opposed to, a few miles south in Mexico, where there's a lot more poverty, and just like to demonize someone because of that. I've never been able to fathom that, just knowing that we're all connected, and I think I've had the benefit of being able to travel and live in different countries, and I have a father who's from another country, and just kind of being able to experience different cultures and the richness of so many other people and places is just what makes the world, even the physical world, so interesting and inviting. And just that, between that and music, which, music, I fell in love with music when I was about 11, and it's never left me. I was obsessed. And
it felt really, really good.
It felt really good, and I certainly couldn't have explained why, but I wanted more.
Yeah.
I knew somehow that I wasn't meant to perform music, but that, as my career evolved, that I wanted to be music adjacent, and then ended up writing about music. And
like my wife.
Like your wife, yeah.
And some of my best friends are, and they know way more about music history than myself, and they're totally cool with, like, no, I don't have to pick up a guitar, but I want to, in the written word, convey my thoughts and what it's meant for me and what it can mean for other people.
Yeah, exactly. And so those, I guess, spiritual aspects of life that I wouldn't have identified as such, but now as I've been on the planet longer, I realize, I think that's the root of it. That's the core. That's why these things are so powerful and special.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, gosh. And Roger, we haven't talked at all about music. I mean, music peripherally, but like what you're doing in terms of musical projects. What are you up to at the moment?
It's always been random for me, being freelance. I started out in the business, so to speak, with my own bands that I co-founded with other very, very talented people. And we were truly bands in that not one of us could do everything ourselves, or we couldn't all do it well by ourselves. So we each kind of added a piece to that puzzle, and it was really gratifying and fulfilling being in those bands early on, up until I was about 30 or so. But often I found myself being, and nobody made me do this. It was something that I unconsciously, a role I assumed in order to help keep things moving along smoothly, the way a mother might in a family of with her husband and children. And there's obviously going to be challenges. And she's the one that was always trying to keep the peace and keep things moving smoothly. And I'm not martyring myself and saying this or anything. It was just, I often spent way too much energy trying to smooth out riffs and make sure communication was flowing as good as it could with people who didn't necessarily have honed communication skills.
In the bands?
In the bands.
Yeah.
Like most young adults do not, myself included. And it was exhausting. And I'm the first to admit that I was a control freak in that I had very specific goals and dreams and visions for the group. And while other band members could say they shared those, well, just because you share them doesn't mean you have the will and strength to rise to the occasion and do them. It's like a trio or a quartet or a quintet. It's like a five-headed beast. And in those moments, those rare moments where you come together and everything gels, it's literally miraculous. But the rest of the time, you're like five people just trying to kind of individuate and say what you have to say. And so, I mean, that's why so many bands break up, particularly if they don't have the commercial success that can justify oh, well, clearly I don't get along with you, but we're going to take separate limousines and we're going to fly in separate planes to get to the show. And we'll have fun for that hour on stage and maybe we'll smile at each other once, but our paycheck is going to be so gigantic at the end of the show. It's going to, it's why we're sticking together for the sake of the kids and not breaking up kind of thing. So that was exhaustive. So by the time I was 30, I was like, I want to continue to be in music, whatever that's going to look like, record and tour. But I'm tired of trying to do it in personal projects. Like, my gosh, I would love nothing more than to be a sideman for somebody who's already got all this shit figured out.
So that was your Jellyfish experience primarily?
Jellyfish and Imperial Drag were the two major label projects I had before the age of 30. And I was looking around for artistic environments to happily align myself with and take more of a backseat role. And the Beck project came along. So I've been with Beck as a sideman, playing here and there on his records, touring off and on for 27 years. I mean, there have been chunks of time where that wasn't happening, but mostly it has been happening. And the rest of the time has been having lots of fun as a freelance keyboardist, a background singer, arranging orchestrations on people's records. I don't really, Beck's been my main touring situation. It's not that I would tour with anybody who wanted to ask me if I thought it was a good fit, but I prefer being in the studio recording. I find that vastly more fulfilling. Yeah. I just like the process of record making, whether it's my own or other people's. So I've enjoyed a lot of the session work, but it's freelance. So it comes in waves like anything else, and it's not for everybody. You just get practiced at squirreling away savings so that when the phone's not ringing, you're not worried, and you do your best, and it's a juggling act. But I mean, I wouldn't trade it. I've had so many incredible experiences, and again, especially in a city like Los Angeles, where so many people come to share their talents and artistic offerings. Really, at the end of the day, everybody's talented. It really starts coming down to your personality skills and are you good company? And do people feel inspired to make music with you? It's like, yeah, you can play the part. Yeah, you can read the chart. And I'm not discounting that stuff. I have always considered myself jack of a lot of trades, not necessarily master of any. There's a lot of masters in this town, but a lot of them get hired to do the one thing, and they'd better hope that that one thing is fashionable. And in certain instances, it is. I mean, there's guys that only get hired to do read down the chart for the film scores, which is not an easy job. and it takes a select few to be able to do that. I've been able to find employment and creative fulfillment in a wide variety of arenas in music in Los Angeles, and that's what actually has kept things interesting and fun for me. I had a lot of fun doing remixes for a while, and not because I came from the DJ culture where the clients just wanted like the 4 on the floor house remix for the dance club. They actually wanted me to not do that and try to experiment and do something crazy and experimental. And I would have never have thought of that. Well, let's give it to Roger and see what the machine looks like that he puts it through. So with that liberty, I had a lot of fun. That was in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. Tony Hoffer and I were a remix team for a while, and then I worked on my own as Tony got more into just producing. But then, budgets changed and what's fashionable and desired for promotion changes, and social media shows up. Everything's constantly evolving. So to figure out where my skill set is valued and employment is a constant journey. In fact, one of my first podcasts was during COVID, and this gentleman, he's a drummer, very talented guy, and he does a lot of scoring. He started interviewing musicians, and we were talking, and I went off on, the inherent challenges and rewards of my line of work and so forth, and just my age group, my generation, what values I grew up with musically versus what generations now hold as valuable in pop music. And he said, so let me get this straight. You're an expert in an environment that no longer values experts. And I went, well, I guess you could put it that. Thank you. That's quite a compliment. And I would agree with that statement. There are reasons I got into the music business because I was inspired, just like you were at 11. And I'll just take a super obvious one, melody. So my age group is that, even though I was a little toddler when the Beatles hit, I still got to experience the aftermath of their musical impact. And I'm just using them because they were so popular and famous. So whether it was Wings or any of their solo endeavors, melodic, melody-oriented, sing-along, hooky rock and roll and dance music was the norm. That's what society all kind of got together unconsciously and said, we value this. Give us more of it. And then maybe the disco craze comes along. Oh, we want to dance more now. So give us more of that. And then that runs its course and hip-hop shows up more. Well, the last 10 years, whether I like it or not, society as a whole has basically said, we no longer, and this has been a long time coming, we don't value melody the way our parents' generation did, the way it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you could say. In fact, melody is now the exception. What we value more is rhythm, beat, rapping, poetry. Okay, fine. Great. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm saying that's not my training. That's not what I got into the business for. Melody is one of the things that is the final kind of frosting on a musical cake of excitement and inspiration for me. So if I'm running around with the greatest melodies in the world to share with you, and you're like, yeah, sorry, that doesn't interest me right now. That's not, I'm going to this festival, and the top 10 people on the bill are of a rap hip hop nature, or even if it's like a rock band, which is now a guitar based rock band, which is now abnormal. That's the exception. And they may be really great, and they may be super talented and adventurous and unique. I guarantee you, melody has nothing to do with it's not the emphasis. They're emphasizing other things, and that's great. But I share this because it's a real, it's something people take for, oh, well, you're a musician, so all music works for you, and you can play all music, and you can write all music, and we can put you in any musical setting, and you can thrive. Kind of. I mean, that's one of the things I've tried to do is float and remain interested and relevant in a variety of settings. But the fact of the matter is, me being inspired by the Smiths, for example, has almost nothing to do with what has been popular now and in the last 15 years.
Right.
I mean, certainly Morrissey can have solo records and they do fine, but they're not the top of the bell curve as far as, it's not Drake.
Just to add in, you've appeared on Morrissey's solo albums.
Thank God. I mean, thank God that worked out because, I wouldn't be here if I mean, there's so many bands, so many artists that inspired me, but, I know this household has a mutual love for all things Smiths and Morrissey's solo efforts. And so it's been a really incredible, serendipitous, and again, miraculous thing that this person knew this person, and Maz was deciding to record his records in the States, and this, that, and the other, and somehow I ended up on a solo album of his, being invited in 2004, and it worked out, right? Again, doesn't matter if I have the talent and chops to be there, we might not have gotten along as co-creators. And Roger's very talented, but I don't care for the energy that he brings into the environment. I don't think we should call him back. Well, thankfully the opposite happened, and we continue to be friends, and he invites me on his projects. But I'm fascinated by the role music plays just culturally for all of us. And so I'm always kind of analyzing. The analyst in me, the psychotherapist, loves seeing who responds to what and why. Why can you have the Church of the Smiths and Morrissey, and then you cut to 20 years later and it's there's 5 other churches, and they don't really have anything to do with each other. And suddenly now, like anything that sounds remotely like that is now a retro fest, or it's old people's music. And I liken it to being a little kid in the backseat of my grandparents' car, which were some of the most joy-filled, innocent, wonderful childhood moments. And the Beatles are on the radio. I remember, like, Hey Jude came on the radio. And me and my little brother's like, Grandpa, turn it up. And we're singing in the back, la, 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 la. And my grandpa, he's not saying anything. And the song ends, he goes, I don't understand you guys. Why do they always got to be hollering all the time? Because it just sounded like screaming to him.
That's so interesting, yeah.
And all these years later, I go, right, because Grandpa grew up with the big bands, swing bands, Sinatra, Stan Kenton, Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong. That was his rock and roll. That was his pop music. That was his Drake. That was his Beyonce. So, of course, the Beatles are going to sound like complete insanity to him. And I've had a few of those moments recently.
Yeah, I've been in the Coachella dance tent a time or two where it's like 2 people and a couple of turntables just jumping up and down for an hour. And I mean, it can be fun to dance to that, but to me, that's not the type of music that like fills my soul.
Well, that's right. And I'm not sitting here bashing hip hop or EDM or anything. Like there are moments of this stuff that is brilliant and inspiring and it excites me to no end. And I'm so glad. And the world is a better place because it exists. I'm just saying, as a whole, these aren't the elements that inspired me to be creative and to share musically the way I do. And for me to just like hear something, go, oh, I got an idea. I know what to do here. Oh, quick! Somebody grab me a keyboard, or I'll go out to the piano. Put me in record. Let's do this.
I don't know if this is any consolation, Roger, but journalism, I feel, has taken a similar journey in many ways in terms of like being an expert where experts are no longer valued. Like the journalism training I had in school and then right out of college working for a daily newspaper that was fact-checked, and every article was well-researched, and there were usually multiple interviews, and you tried to be as objective as possible and show both sides or the multiple sides. Of course, I know there is no such thing as pure objectivity, but you really endeavored to do that and to make sure everything was factual and fact-checked and well written. And now it's just flash forward a few years after that, when I studied journalism in college, I thought it would be a profession like nursing or being a lawyer, just always around in that similar form. And then just right after I graduated and worked for a few years, the internet kind of exploded, and it became about getting something published as quickly as possible, whether or not it was completely accurate or well written at all or any of that. And it's just kind of evolved in that way. And I've had to evolve what I do and my skills. And I think in some ways, it's not writing, which I still love, but podcasting allows you to have that longer form conversation that the quick clickbait articles don't afford you anymore the way some in-depth articles used to. So, and then I work in different ways with storytelling, but it's not at all, in some shape, some areas like the New York Times reporting, for example, perhaps might have the longer form, more in-depth researched articles, but it's not the norm. It's certainly the exception.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the bell curve audience, they're not willing to invest. It's a time investment.
Right.
To go down a rabbit hole, even if it's something you like. So really, journalism is headlines, the art of headlines now. Can we hook the person through the headline and get the main point? It's rough. Yeah. I mean, because we witness it with political and ideological agendas as well.
And that's a problem, because part of the reason I became a journalist was to be kind of that system of checks and balances, right, and creating an informed citizenry to participate in the democratic process.
It's no longer an informed citizenry. It's a persuaded, influenced. It's activism, citizenry.
Yeah, or just kind of uninformed, just reading about, who, I don't know, Olivia and Harry are getting in trouble with this week or something.
Or you mean just gossip?
Just the good celebrity gossip. I think that happens a lot. And, there's a time and a place for that too, but it's not kind of informing ourselves about issues that will really affect our lives and the lives of those around us. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure why I went on that tangent. I guess just because I can relate to what you were saying about how things change and evolve, and what you were trained to do might not be as in fashion. So we need to evolve, and it presents, I guess, new opportunities as well as the flip side of it.
I mean, you can, a great love of mine and great inspiration for me, certainly in my early years of committing to music and practicing and developing skill sets, was through the world of jazz, which is an art form that predates my birth by a lot of decades. So I would have to go back to music that should be very unfashionable to my generation and learn about it. And what I found was a lot of it was very corny and kind of goofy, and I didn't relate to it, except that most jazz literature was the art, certainly the improvisational groups of the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that I was excited by, the Miles Davis's schools of the world, right? And many others, was taking what are called standards. So it was the popular music of the day, a lot of which came from Broadway musicals and so forth, Gershwin. They became classics, and they're called standards, and we all know them, whether we love them or hate them. And the joy for the jazz musician was to take these songs that everybody had heard ad infinitum and interpret them in a new way and improvise over them. And you could make it very simple and straightforward for your non-experienced jazz listener, or you could take it into the stratosphere to the point where it's becoming almost atonal and completely cerebral, and like it's modern classical music at that point. It's so avant-garde. But I was terribly fascinated with that world. And that required great commitment to the craft. Well, again, unless you're going to devote your life to just then playing jazz over and over, which some people have chosen to do, I could sit in my basement and practice my jazz chops and get better and better and better, because I kind of put that on the back burner because I was so fascinated by the rock pop world of the 80s and 90s. But that's not going to pay my bills.
Yeah.
Unless I've got some inheritance or what have you that's headed my way, which is not the case. So it's this weird thing of like necessity can breed invention and reinventing yourself and applying yourself differently. And
that can be good too,
absolutely.
stepping outside of your comfort zone
Absolutely.
can really help us grow and learn in new ways, which we might not have done if we had just been able to continue doing what we were doing unchallenged,
Yeah.
So, but Raj, well, I know you've got an appointment coming out too, but I wanted to.
No, I have time if you don't have some questions we didn't get to because I was long-winded.
No, I feel like we covered so much. I guess I would just ask, like, what do you have on the burner musically speaking now? Like, what can people keep an ear out for?
Well, most recently, I reunited with some of my old Jellyfish bandmates, Eric Dover and Tim Smith. And prior to COVID lockdowns and so forth, we started like a writing project, just the three of us. And then we were so happy with the songs that we amassed. We're like, well, let's try to record them, because it's one thing to play them for each other on the guitar, but just to have a recording always feels like you saw the idea through to completion. So because one of us lives in Atlanta and we all have so many other freelance jobs going on, it's been a very time-consuming process, but that's okay. And a lot of long-distance work, and technology can allow for that. But we just finished our third EP. So we essentially did 12 songs. Instead of putting it on an old-fashioned 12-song record or CD, we put 3 EPs out over the last 3 years, 2020, 2021, and then, the most recent one is May of this year. And the project's called the Lickerish Quartet, and so you can just go to lickerishquartet.com and explore there if you want. We made some videos. We had a lot of fun actually doing fan engagement experiences. So in addition to getting the download or the CD, whatever, you could hire us for any number of engagement experiences, whether it was sharing a meal with us, you could purchase that, or doing an interview, a Zoom call with the band or just one of us, or we actually ended up playing on a lot of people's home projects, which was incredible. Sometimes they would want all of us, like, I want you guys to, I wrote this song, I've recorded it, I want you guys to sing all the background vocals, like, with your sound, which was super, super cool. Or sometimes I just want Eric to play some guitar on my song. So there are different price points for all those things. So we did a lot of that, still doing some of that, but that's a project that you can go check out. And then I'm putting the finishing touches on another solo EP. I put one out in, thank you. I put one out in 2018, which was a lot of fun. Glamping, yes. Which was the first one I'd put out since my 3 solo records in the mid 2000s. So I just tried, no matter what I'm doing for other people, I try to honor those pieces of my heart and soul that have come together in songs that are unfinished that I really want to complete. There's it's almost like psychological to see them through to fruition in whatever time I have left in this body, like I said, because it is the most fulfilling thing, even if 2 people hear it. And, I still get emails from Japan or Israel or wherever saying, I'm in my teens. My dad loved your band Jellyfish, and he played them. So that's how I got into the group. But now I've discovered the Lickerish Quartet project, or your work with Beck, or you played on so-and-so's record. And, just like us, and we're fans of any of our heroes. And so that's been great. And so, again, I try to have all these things always moving. Sometimes it's a lot and feels overwhelming, and am I just spinning my wheels, and how am I actually getting anything done or getting bills paid? But it keeps things interesting, and I'd be frustrated if I didn't have some solo music outlet of some kind. Yeah. And I often don't perform the music out live, like, right, you've never heard me go, oh, come down to this coffee house, I'll be sitting there playing my songs. My songs and Lickerish Quartet, the people I collaborate with, we like that art of production. So the songs are very layered, lots of harmony, a lot of intricacies, even though on the surface the songs are very straightforward, sing-along, rock pop stuff. But they're very difficult to perform live.
Oh, yeah.
Unless I can hire 20 people to help me recreate the record, which I can't. And I have performed in 2018. I did some shows, but it was brutal. I had fun, but it was exhausting. And it's the old. I had to put so much money out to make the show happen, versus you're going in the hole.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just the nature of the beast. And frankly, I do enjoy performing live, but it's still I still get anxious. And it's mostly because I don't do it. I don't have a gig every Friday night. I'm going to be at this club in front of an audience. Sometimes the audience is going to be good. Sometimes the audience is going to be bad, but I don't have that practice. It's not, again, I'd rather be in the studio capturing moments that way.
Yeah.
So that's the extent of my solo work. And I have been recording this year on a new Beck project, but that usually looks like us getting together with groups of musicians, and then he kind of amasses these piles of song ideas, and then he goes away and edits them, sculpts them down into what his vision is. Sometimes we'll come back for some overdubs, but he's working on that, and I hope there's a new album from him next year with some of my contributions on that.
It's exciting.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, I'm such an admirer of Beck's work. He's really incredible, and you on it. I think I realized that, and I never asked you about this, but I was talking to Ray the other day that I think I was, and to Darren, I think I was at one of your shows at Wembley Stadium in London.
With Jellyfish?
No,
with Beck.
With Beck, where he hurt himself at the end of the show. Were you? And it was before we knew each other, so it would have been the early 2000s.
I stopped playing with him around, because I joined in '97, and then 2001 I took a break. So you might have seen me right after that.
I think it would have been 2000, actually.
Oh, then that would have been me.
I think
it was Midnight Vultures tour.
It was Midnight Vultures tour.
That was me in the Cape.
So I saw you back then before.
I will never forget that show, because it was London was very welcoming.
Yes.
And Beck could do no wrong as far as the public and press were concerned. So it was a great time to be a fly on the wall.
That sounds like fun. And then, Roger, one last thing that I like to ask, because this podcast is about the power of storytelling, and whether that's sharing your stories like we are now together. I know you're not prescribing methodologies for people to follow necessarily, but either sharing the way we are or sharing in music. What do you think is powerful about sharing your stories?
This is ultimately the only way we can learn from other people's experiences, and then, like I said, you go audition it for yourself. And I would just encourage people to remember how powerful they are, and to muster the strength, the courage, the will to be more responsible for your own life and the life that you have, that you like or don't like, than you ever have. Because great rewards and peace, more love, more peace, and gee, lo and behold, you probably won't be surprised at more finance. Everything starts locking into place if you realize that you are empowered to make the changes that you want to see in your life. And the greatest thing about that is, because it sounds like a very selfish endeavor, a very self-absorbed, narcissistic endeavor in the worst sense. As you continue to become more grounded, more peaceful, more aware, more present, more healed, you suddenly are walking out your front door a better version of yourself, and people notice that. And you suddenly are able to contribute to the suffering in your more immediate community in a greater way.
To help alleviate.
Exactly. It goes back to the old phrase, why am I out on the front lines of activism trying to heal this, that, and the other if my own house is in disarray, if I haven't even made my bed? It's that kind of proverb, analogy, or whatever. And I found that couldn't be more true, because in order to heal some of the very real things that were going on with me, just physically, I had to really step off the track of the rat race, and I didn't work for a while. I didn't pursue work. I didn't hustle work. I didn't pursue, and there's a lot of solo work that I had to do. And what I started seeing is, as things were getting better and better for me, suddenly where people were like, "You've changed. I really like this new you." And I'm like, "I have? I don't even really know what you're talking about." But they saw something, and they're like, "Hey, why don't you come down to the so-and-so event? We're having a bunch of people over." And blah, blah. Right. So suddenly now I'm in community, and you start being able to see how you can help, world problems, local problems just in your relationships or in your family or whatever, because you have a different set of tools.
Yeah, there's
so you can give back, is my point.
Expression: people who are wrapped up in themselves make a very tight package.
Absolutely.
It's hard to see the world and the possibilities for you to help improve it when you're just so consumed with your own troubles or fears or whatever the case may be.
And a real, I don't know if I want to call it a shortcut, but I wished I'd been made aware of the value in this much earlier on, is understanding the role ego plays for everybody on the planet, right? So again, ego for me means self-definition. It's who we think we are. And if it's who we think we are, then we're going to conduct ourselves based on that artifice, that avatar.
Yeah.
Okay. And the joy of ego recognition is that you start seeing and you start understanding, well, that's how everybody else, mostly unconsciously, is approaching me, and how we're all engaging. And if you're in a band, how these 4 or 5 people are engaging. It's 5 egos. And the shortcut is, if you can understand nothing else, and Eckhart Tolle has written volumes and volumes on this, and I really found his illustration of what the ego looks like, how it shows up, helpful to me. But at its core, the ego, our false self-image of ourselves, is only interested in one thing when it is engaged with others, or even when it's not. But so whether we're in person with somebody, or we're seeing somebody on screen, or like say an artist or something, or a celebrity, the ego's only interested in one thing: making sure you feel better than the other, or making sure you feel less than the other. And the ego doesn't care which, because as long as you're feeling either better than somebody else or not as good as somebody else, the ego's employed. It has a job.
Yeah.
So it's always going to be there until you see that very easy thing, that am I entering into this environment going, oh, well, I got this. I'm smarter than all these people. I'm certainly more talented than all these people. And you have to be aware that your ego's playing these games. You can, if you listen, you can see that maybe that's what's going on here.
Or I'm not as good as these people.
Exactly.
It's 2 sides of the same coin.
Right. I've just entered the room, and oh my God, she's so much more pretty than I am. And he's so talented. He's going to do all the talking. Clearly, I'm not going to do any of the talking.
Yeah.
Well, so in both of those situations, better than, less than, we don't get to be our fully expressed, grounded, peaceful love. I guarantee you one thing: if we're preoccupied with better or less than, we're not extending love.
Right.
We're too preoccupied with fear-based consciousness.
That's so beautiful.
Not good enough.
Yeah, I've heard that before. But so, like you said, it sometimes takes hearing it multiple times or said in different ways to really hit home and hit your heart. And I was talking on another interview to the artist Jaguar Jones about the kind of the little I don't know what you would call it, kind of a physical token that I've come to represent my ego, which is a little ceramic lizard. and you just kind of pat it on the head and say, okay, you can go to sleep now. Thanks for trying to keep me safe, but you're not needed.
Yeah.
So
I've got this. Right.
Right.
Your services served me at some point in my life, and I'm simply continuing to grow up and evolve.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, your services are no longer required here. Right. And it's not even making the ego wrong, or it's the devil, get it away from me. It's awareness. It's simply being aware.
And seeing it with compassion rather than judgment.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you start saying, oh, it's anytime that I'm not noticing, trust me, it's in effect. It's actually running the show, and I'm going to be at the effect of that, and the others around me are going to be at the effect of that, unless I have, made peace with it. And
it's a process. You're not one and done. It's a muscle, I think, that you work out like any other, unless maybe you're I imagine even the most enlightened beings have to practice it. It's
right. That we've called the enlightened wise ones on the planet, they're in lives of devotion. Mm-hmm. It can become a monkdom in the ashram, if
or it doesn't have to be. They can just do it in their daily lives. It
can be walking meditation,
right?
Is what we were talking about before.
Yeah. Oh, Roger, I feel like I could talk to you for 2 more hours, but we should probably
podcast part 2, 3,
land
and 4.
this plane. So thank you
Whatever
so
works.
much. It's always such a joy.
Thank you for having me out to share.